everyone, and welcome to Let's Dive In, the Genetic Poll. My name is Haley,
And I'm Austin.
and we're going to be talking about investigative genetic genealogy, or IgG for short. And what is IgG? Well, it is a subset of forensic genealogy, and it's a technique that combines genetic testing with traditional genealogical research to generate investigative leads in unsolved violent crimes.
And if I recall, the police analyze genetic data from publicly accessible genealogical databases like GEDmatch or Family Tree DNA. But basically, whatever DNA is found at the crime scene is uploaded to the DNA databases and companies that offer these IgG services. So we know that in traditional DNA typing, analysts use stRDNA as genetic markers, but IgG is different because it looks at SNPs, which are basically single nucleotide polymorphisms, and they look at over 500,000 of them across the DNA genome. So this is different from CODIS, which only looks at 13 to 20, STR sequences for profiling. And basically, looking at SNPs allows investigators to look for shared blocks of DNA between a crime scene sample and a sample donor for potential relatives. So closer relatives obviously will have larger shared blocks of DNA. And just to note that they're not just using random DNA databases, right? Like the databases like Ancestry, DNA, 23andMe, they don't go out of their way to help the police unless there's a valid court order or a warrant that requires them to cooperate.
Yeah, and IgG helped in fighting the serial killer rapist and former police officer, the Golden State Killer. But I do think it was a bit shady how they ended up finding him.
Yeah, I remember hearing about this too. I don't know all the details, but I know there were some ethical issues with how the police arrived at his arrest.
Yeah, so basically what happened was the prosecutors had created a fake account, submitted his genetic material to the database, and which eventually led them to a relative of his. But because they had used a database without a warrant, it should have been a violation of the Fourth Amendment. And this eventually led to a conflict about privacy and IgG. The current databases used specifically for IgG are GEDmatch, Family Tree DNA, and DNA Solves.
Yeah, and as of January 2020, a lot of the popular genetic genealogy companies have provided information in their terms of service about how law enforcement can handle this data, right? So customers know what they're agreeing to, and so they can opt in or out whether law enforcement can have access to their DNA. But let me ask you, would you ever use an ancestry website?
No, because even though I know I wouldn't commit any crimes and I know my relatives wouldn't either, I would still worry about what they're doing with my genetic data because I know my privacy won't be completely secure, even with all of the policies in place. Like, for example, in 23andMe's website policy, they say that if they are required by law, they would have no choice but to disclose any and all information for an investigation.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I personally wouldn't want to have my DNA wandering in databases for the same reason. And I would think it would suck to have my privacy invaded. But I feel like if that's a price to pay to bring justice to victims and their families, it's something that's worth considering. So we've already seen since going into effect in 2019, IgG has already helped solve over 50 cases, and that was just within the first 18 months of its use.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. And that's it for today, folks. We are going to wrap it up with some closing remarks. So there are a lot of privacy concerns with IgG. However, regulations have been placed to ensure the protection of both genetic data as well as helping investigators.
Yeah, and we can't deny that it's had a lot of success with catching notorious criminals like the Golden State Killer, and it continues to help solve cold cases. It's just a matter of whether privacy is more important than justice and vice versa.
All right. Thanks for tuning in today, and we'll see you next time on Let's Dive In, the Genetic Poll. Bye.